Hello, Sinead.
Hi, how are you, my love?
I'm good. I was thinking about you and the Tavistock closing and everything that's just happened. And I was thinking, this must be massive for somebody like you. It must be a really big, complicated events in your brain when something like that happens.
Do you know, it was so strange because, I mean, Jesus, for the past couple of years, I've been saying to myself, JIDs will shut down. I know they will. And, the CQC report came out, the whistleblowers came out, Dr. David Bell, and I was like, it's only a matter of time. I know it will shut down. And still, when I woke up and checked my Twitter feed and saw all the articles saying it has now been announced that JIDs will be shut down and repurposed, I was still surprised. I don't know. It was a very comforting reminder that there's still sanity and that we're not just screaming into the void, and that when people learn what's actually happening in these spaces, they won't tolerate it. So it's really uplifting and really encouraging.
And what happened? You opened Twitter. I got the same. I got a message saying, did you hear what happened in London? And I was like, what happened in London? And yeah. Do you think the likes of you were treated at the Sandyford? Do you think the likes of them will notice, or will they? Because I'm the same in Ireland. I'm thinking, are they going to hear what happened?
They're gonna have to. I mean, one of the things that came out of like the Cass review report when Hillary Cass added her update was about the absolute just ridiculousness of the use of puberty blockers, and you kind of can't ignore that type of thing because parents are going to have questions. So if they were to take a kid to somewhere like Sandyford and say, I read online that there's a possibility that taking puberty blockers could temporarily or even permanently disrupt brain maturation. The Sandyford can't turn around and say that's not true, because they don't know. But Scotland is very differently ideologically captured. There are groups up here such as LGBT Youth Scotland, who are more dangerous for this country than mermaids are. So whatever developments happen in England and Wales, it's gonna work differently in Scotland, and obviously you'd know how
Yeah,
differently it's going to work in Ireland.
you tell me how it's different in Scotland, and I'll tell you how it's different in Ireland, because this is going to spread out.
Mhm.
It starts in London, but it's going to spread out.
I think because the most impressive developments that we have seen have been down in England. You had Keira Bell down in England, you had Sonia Appleby down in England, you had Maya Forstater down in England, you had Alison Bailey very recently. You know, so we haven't really had that up here. There has been a couple of articles that have been done, some of which I participated in, that were kind of calling out the shoddy business of the Sandyford, but it's really not as publicly examined and called out up here as it is down south.
It's very interesting because we've done some schools training and college training in Genspect in Scotland, and we were told unequivocally that Sandyford is not like Tavistock at all. Sandyford is really a much more rational, reasonable, mature
Uh-huh.
attitude. And I was told you don't need to worry, and you shouldn't compare them because you're comparing apples and oranges. And I was like, really, really? Because I was thinking about you going, could that be? So what do you tell me?
I mean, I think my biggest concern with how things are going up here is we don't really have, I'm here, and there's a couple of other wonderful Scottish witches up here, but the big push has mostly been concentrated on the Tavistock, specifically JIDs, and things like Stonewall and things. Next will be mermaids. And I don't know, is gendered intelligence English based as well?
Yeah.
So I think it's the titans of gender ideology are English based, and so it's our English sisters and brothers that are calling it out. And it will migrate. It will eventually reach Scotland and Ireland, but I think that the peak process of progress that we see will happen in England first.
Have they ever reached out to you? Because you've been very vocal. You've been very loud. You've said, I was harmed by this treatment.
Well, here's a funny story. I spoke to the Daily Mail a little while ago, and they messaged me and they were like, we want to reach out to the Sandyford to ask them to comment. We're going to tell them that we're writing this article and that you're criticizing them. And I was like, yep, by all means, reach out to them. I hope they respond. They didn't respond. Oh, no, sorry, they did. They did a very generic, we give the best care to our patients, blah, blah, blah. But then for the first time since 2017, I got an email from the Sandyford and they were like, we've been contacted by a journalist who has explained your story to us, and we would very much like you to come in and have a talk with us, tell us what you think we could do to improve, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, absolutely. I would love to come in and speak to you. I'd love to tell you about everything that happened. And then the Daily Mail article came out, and I haven't heard a peep from the Sandyford since. So I, hmm?
I said, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
you could still go in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose I could email them back and be like, you guys didn't reach out to me with the appointment that you said that we were going to set up. But my inkling, and I may be being pessimistic, I'll grant that, but my inkling was they reached out to me in hopes that I would change my mind and not put the article out, but the article went out. I haven't heard anything from them. And I also found out that the gender specialist who prescribed my testosterone and referred me for the surgery has since retired. And so when I was speaking on the phone to the lady from the Sandyford, she was like, yeah, the new people here who have picked up your file don't know anything about you that's not in the file. And so I'm very curious to know what is in that file. So it's something that at some point I want to reconnect with the Sandyford. I'd like to go up and speak to them in person. I'd like to be granted access to my files, but I haven't heard anything from them. So evidently I'm going to need to be the one to get the ball rolling.
Oh my God. And
Yeah.
it's a very strong point you have now, because your point, if I'm right in thinking, is, 5 years ago, I went to your clinic vulnerable and distressed with lots of trauma, lots going on. There was loads going on. And the treatment you gave me was like a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because even I went through a sort of paranoid phase where I was racking my brain and I was like, am I misremembering? Were they more thorough than I'm remembering? Am I not giving them enough credit? And I sat at it and I thought about it and I thought about it. And the thing that convinced me that I wasn't wrong was I said to myself, if that was my niece who had went to that clinic and got that treatment, would I have been satisfied that she'd been given proper care? Absolutely not. I'm kind of harsh with myself because of all my own issues. But if someone that I loved got that shoddy treatment before irreversible changes,
Yeah.
I would have been appalled. So there's no reason why I shouldn't be appalled that it was done to me.
Yes, you're right. And do you want to say what they did? You want to say how the process went?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be very quick, because so I called the Sandyford myself. I self-referred in early 2014. I called them up. They said, okay, we'll put you on the waiting list. And then I didn't hear from them for about a year.
What age were you? 2014. So what was that?
23.
23.
Yeah, little baby Sinead.
I'm only a little baby at 23. But go on anyway.
Yeah, so they eventually, I had a lot going on in 2014. Like that was the year I was hospitalized for a dissociative breakdown. And so they called me a couple of months after that. So this is early 2015, about a year after I made the self-referral. And they said, okay, come in for your appointment. The first appointment will just be the basics. And I was like, okay. So I went in and they asked me, how am I feeling? How am I identifying? What is it that I'm wanting? Why am I here? How was my childhood? Things like that. And then the second appointment was I got weighed. They measured my height. They took my blood pressure. They kind of went over, do you know what taking testosterone will do to you? You know that you might lose your head hair. You know that you might grow a beard. You know that like all these changes will happen. And then I think I had maybe one or two more appointments after that. That again, it was very basic, general things. Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Are you studying? What do you want to do as a career? And then within a matter of months of my first appointment, I was injecting Sustanin 250. There was at no point, not once, at no point during any of my appointments did this man sit down with me and say, I've been looking at your medical history and I can see red flag here, red flag here, red flag here. I think we should talk about that first. That did not happen.
And
And
those
that's
red
where they
flags
went wrong.
were the dissociative disorder,
Mhm.
or certainly dissociative breakdown that had happened just a few months previous.
Yeah, because my history went back until 2012. So 2012, I had a series of breakdowns, one of which included a thankfully failed suicide attempt. 2014 was the dissociative breakdown. And then there was other things about, I'd went to my GP and they tried to give me antidepressants and they didn't work well with me. They made me worse. And they weren't really sure what was going on with me. I was evaluated for a personality disorder. They didn't really know what to make of me. And so when I went to the Sandyford, I had all of this stuff in my medical history, but no actual condition to concentrate on. I just turned up as someone who was depressed, had a history of self-harm, suicidal ideation. They didn't really know what to make of the dissociative break, so they didn't really discuss it with me at the Sandyford. It was very much, okay, you're here because you identify as trans, therefore you're trans, and that's what we're going to focus on.
And how long had you been identifying?
It's different between when I started identifying in my head and when I started my own social transition. So I would say the trans identity started to bubble around 2012 when I was 21.
When you were upset?
Yeah. That was during the first suicide attempt. And then I tried to sort of live as a lesbian in 2013. I was like, okay, no, we're not going to do that. It was different for me being like dirt poor working class. To come out as trans is different than if you came from like an affluent middle class background. I was very scared about coming out as trans, which seems so silly now because everyone was lovely about it. So I tried to not want to transition in 2013 by myself. I wasn't getting any help from therapists or counselors or anything like that. And then 2014 arrived, and that was when the breakdown happened. And that was when I started really coming out to friends and family. Between the ages of 22 and 23 is when I came out socially as a trans man, and I started binding and cut all my hair off and things like that. And then 2014 called the Sandyford. 2015 was seen, evaluated, diagnosed, prescribed testosterone, and then 2017 referred for the double mastectomy. So it's all condensed into about 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I wonder, really, did you see any psychologists, psychiatrists, or were they just not acting as psychologists and psychiatrists?
It's funny because I saw like I wasn't very well at all prior to the trans identity. And I did see therapists and counselors, and I had a social worker and things like that. Prior to announcing the trans identity, they were all very interested in, trying to get me to open up about some of the things that I'd experienced. But the second the trans identity was there, they weren't interested in the depression or the suicidal ideation or all the other crazy, insane shit that I did. I was nuts. I was nuts in my 20s.
And me and all of
But
how nuts
no.
we can go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine, like, because I'm sure that you were far crazier than me. I can imagine young Stella being fucking mental. But can you imagine if, like, when you were 22, 23, and you were going out there and doing all the crazy things that young people in their 20s do, and then being affirmed and allowed to do something to yourself that was irreversible?
I'm honest, I'd be volcanic. I would be so angry. I could just imagine myself trying to sleep and rearing up in the bed thinking, I want retribution.
Mhm.
I when let's say I thought of when I saw the cast review and Jesus closing down, I thought, but how do the detransitioners, I was thinking of you and Kira, how do you cope, really, is what I was thinking, because you must want to rip their heads off.
You do. I mean, obviously we're all different, so every detransitioner reacts differently. But I think, from my own experiences and from the so many other detrans women that I've spoke to, you've spoke to many of them as well. You've got Kira and Helena and Grace, and and most of us, many of us, do say that there is a period after you detransition where you're just so consumed with shame and guilt and you hate yourself. And that's followed up by you can't keep hating yourself this much. It's too much. So you point it outwards. And that can get really ugly where you really can feel true hatred for the people who affirmed you and allowed this to happen. And hatred is a very powerful word. I'm not using it lightly. But there was a period early in my detransition where I hated the people who affirmed me and I wished nothing but ill on them. I'm thankfully past that and I'm working through it. But my mind went to really, really dark places. And I've spoken to other detransitioners, most of whom are younger than me, transitioned younger. And they will say the same, you experience an anger and a resentment and a bitterness that you never thought was humanly possible. It's because you can't believe it, you hit that wall where you look down at your body and you look back on everything that's been allowed to happen and you just think, I I can't believe that I was allowed to do this. I can't believe that people not only affirmed it, but they celebrated it. I can't believe no one tried to stop me. I can't believe these medical professionals didn't try to help me. I can't believe I'm stuck like this for the rest of my life. It's it's really difficult. But to the other detransitioners, I'd like to say you do get to a point where you do work through it and it does make you stronger. And look, you realize that if you can get through this, you can get through nearly anything. It might not be the most difficult thing that you'll ever face. There's obviously a lot more horrible personal tragedies that can happen to you, but people have survived worse. So we're impressively strong creatures. So I think ultimately most detransitioners, no matter how bad they feel now, they're going to be fine as long as we are there to help them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you said is so important. And I think, you and I and all of us need to do more on, this is a process. Like that anger will come and it will go. So
Mm-hmm.
that, because I could imagine people doing dreadful things in the middle of that phase, and on some level need to be told, don't worry, there's more phases to come. You know what I mean? You can get through.
Yeah, I mean, because I think like I get sort of younger detransitioners come, like, message me and stuff like that, and one minute they're like, yeah, I'm fine, and I'll get there and I'll pull through, and then you get a message at like 3:30 in the morning and they're like, I can't believe that I've done this, and I'm like, oh, holy shit, I'm getting out of bed to message them back and stuff. And do you know what, even the worst cases where I have sat up all morning on the verge of tears, pulling my fucking hair out because I think someone that I've been speaking to for several months has just done something to hurt themselves. They eventually get back to me and they're like, sorry about that. Had a bit too much to drink, was feeling a bit sorry for myself, but you know what? I'm actually doing okay. I'm healing with time. And so I'm more confident now because, like, I had to take a break from this last year because it was just too much of a mental toll. But I'm far more confident now. I have a lot of confidence and so much pride for other detransitioners because I know how strong they are. And it's appalling what happened to them. I do want more support to be put in place for them. But do you know what? They're a remarkable bunch of people, and I think they're going to be fine.
They are a remarkable bunch of, and an extraordinarily noticeably really interesting minds. They've been, they've been through something extraordinary, and they've really kind of come through the fire. That's the feeling I get, a real feeling. I've been places. Like GenSpecs is doing this Beyond Transition program, and we're doing, it's lovely, it's going very well, lovely one-to-one counseling for detransitioners and people who've been impacted by gender ideology. But I wonder, now that the Tavistock is closing, what do you think if they offer, should they immediately, no sooner does that announcement come out yesterday, should there have been an announcement today for people like you saying, and now prong two of let's have regional centres with integrated approach is we need centres that acknowledge the distress and try to make reparation for the distress that this has clearly had on so many people.
Absolutely. I mean, if they do it right, and I'm confident they will, because you just have to read the Care Quality Commission report and the CAS review to understand just how bad it is. It's plainly obvious to me, and I'm sure to you and to many other people, that a massive part of this is social contagion. You don't go from 250 referrals a year a decade ago to over 5,000 a year. Like that's not just more acceptance, that is social contagion. So that has been recognized. We also know that puberty blockers are experimental because we don't know anything about them. We know that we've had the whistleblowers come out of the Tavistock. We've had Dr. David Bell, we had the Sonia Appleby case, the safeguarding lead, for Christ's sake, who have all come out and said that a lot of these kids are coming in, they're on the autistic spectrum disorder, they've struggled with eating disorders, they've struggled with abusive past, they come from homophobic homes or backgrounds, or may just have internalized homophobia themselves. There's all of these other issues. We know about it. It is on record. We've been speaking about it for years now. And so if these regional clinics are going to work, the best possible thing that they can do is realize that the reason why GIDS failed was because it became ideologically captured. And so if they can remain clinically neutral and do what's best for their patients with the information we have, these new clinics will be wonderful. And they will vet out the children who are distressed about gender but won't benefit from transition. And if they have a decent bone in their body, they'll also offer counselling for cases of regret and detransition.
Yeah. And I wonder, should they be in the same building or should they be in a different building? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind it being in the same building, but as we'd sort of touched on a little bit ago, sometimes there's a lot of anger there. So I don't know if it'd be very wise to keep them all in the same building.
Really interesting. Yeah.
I mean, what's your take on it? I mean, when you read that GIDS was being shut down, what did you think?
Tears came to my eyes. And I was like you, yeah, of course it was going to close. It was a mess. I've been waiting for it to close since 2018 because I did the film in 2018, and it's like, it's clearly going to close. It's absolutely in disarray. Polly Carmichael is running a rotten ship, as far as I could see, and knows it because she's been told it, because we told her it in 2018. and then when it came out, tears came to my eyes. I was shaken. I just thought, oh my God, finally, it's happening, finally. And then almost immediately I went, all that pain, all that useless, unnecessary pain because of doctors not doing their jobs. Everybody else I can almost forgive. I can almost forgive the activists. I can almost forgive everybody except the doctors who were in the role of responsibility. Though when you went to them, whatever age you were, 23, with your medical history, this isn't news to them. I'm used to meeting a 23-year-old with a medical history. This wouldn't make me blink. I'd know how to handle it. And I'm not extraordinary. I'm just a commoner garden therapist. Anybody would have said, okay, this person needs to proceed very slowly, no major decisions, real wary, keep this steady. Anything big and intense, and let's bring it down a bit, because let's not go up into their madness as such. Let's bring it to it. All this. So you are at your most vulnerable. And they just didn't see it. They didn't meet the responsibilities. It's really sad that it happened. I'm so glad that people like you have spoken up, but isn't it tragic that it's not them, that, you know, Polly Carmichael, they should be out saying what
Yeah.
do we do? What do we
Like that's why I've got a lot of admiration for a lot of the people like, you know, yourself and Maya Forstater and things like that who have been speaking out, but I've got a very special place in my heart for people like Sonia Appleby and Dr. David Bell and
do? Yeah.
Dr. Evans and things like that, where, you know, one thing that I've always thought about is when I was being treated by my gender specialist and my gender team, um, they weren't idiots. They were certified mental health professionals. So were they treating me because they just got it so wrong? Were they treating me because they were ideologically captured? Or were they treating me because they were too afraid to be called transphobic? And I remember reading into Sonia Appleby's case and listening to Dr. David Bell. And they, you know, when it came up in the CQC report again, where they were like, staff do not feel safe or confident to speak out when they see breaches of safeguards. And I'm just like, you're a mental health professional. You can't even go to your safeguard lead when you're seeing young children who may be autistic, who may be gay, who may have been abused, who may be dealing with trauma, who they don't need puberty blockers. And you know that, but you're not going to say anything to save your job. I mean, this whole thing, I try to be sympathetic. I try to put myself in their shoes, but I'm sorry. Like I really don't think that I could turn a blind eye to something like that to protect my livelihood, not when it's the well-being of children and young people. And the most disturbing thing to come out of JIDS was that so many adults, I know that 40 plus of them walked out in protest, which is good, but the other ones who stayed there that whole time, as thousands of kids shuttled through, it's disgusting, and it genuinely blows my mind.
And that was 2019 when they all walked out, and David Bell walked out. The whistle was blown by Marcus Evans. Kira Bell took her case not long after that, and they stayed. They stayed. You know, these clinicians stayed with full knowledge that there was something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, even you, I remember going to the NHS website in like 2020, I think, 2019 or 2020, and going through the treatment for gender dysphoria section. And on there, on the NHS website, it was like, we don't fully understand the long-term effects of puberty blockers. And it's like, then why are you giving them to children? Like that's because it's not even like they might have some slight negative effects. No, they're talking about it might affect your brain development, it might affect your bone development, it might.
And we know it stops your sexual development, and that's a key aspect of adolescent life. You are tampering with people's sexual development. You don't do that. It's so intrusive. It's just.
But that's the thing, like you know about Jazz Jennings, right?
Yeah.
Because like the whole thing was the reason why Jazz's bottom surgery, i.e. vaginoplasty, was so horrible and botched and needed those corrections was because of the lack of growth, because of puberty blockers. So what is it? Do you want to put these children on puberty blockers to affirm them? Or do you want to let them naturally develop? So if as adults they do decide to transition, they've got the material to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And who do you think are the villains of the piece? Do you remember I said earlier, it's the doctors that I have they are in my line of fire. Is it trans activists? Because I know most people think it's the trans activists, and they have sympathy for the doctors. And I think the doctors are very well paid. They're in a position of responsibility. It took a lot to get there, and generally a lot of privilege to get to be a doctor. Generally, you know, you're kind of lucky if you've got to be a doctor. If you got a space in your world that you could be a doctor, and you have to wield it properly. Who do you think should be most remorseful this weekend?
It should absolutely be the people who oversaw and actually allowed for these transition processes to happen. I mean, like, look, the activists and their allies aren't blameless because they have been pushing gender ideology. You know, so you've got people like Mermaids and Stonewall and all the rest of it who you know, they are trying to get this into nurseries, and in some places they've succeeded. So they're definitely not without blame, but the people who should feel worse about themselves are the surgeons who are performing double mastectomies on little girls. It's the people who are giving puberty blockers to very young, obviously confused children. If you're the one that's actually allowing this to happen, you should feel worse, because like the activists and their allies have been going really, really hard for a good couple of years now, and they're still going to lose. So they're not who we should be concerned with. It's the people who are actually doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think will happen with mermaids?
Oh God. Do you know, I'd never heard of mermaids, funnily enough, until I began detransition. I'd never heard of them while I was trans-identified. And then I heard about this group called Mermaids, and they were like, oh, you know, all this crazy stuff about how they were saying that the spectrum, you know, that stupid spectrum graph and stuff. And they're like, oh, we should be able to teach children as young as 6 and 7 years old that they can be whatever they identify as, and queer theory and all the rest of it. And I was like, no, there's no way they would put that into schools. And they fucking did. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, because who Jackie and their mum, you know, went to Thailand on the 16th birthday and things like that.
Oh, yeah, Susie Green and Jackie, her daughter, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, I didn't believe that. When I read about that, I was like, no mother would take her son to Thailand at 16 and castrate him. And when I read that and then learned that she was actually in a position of power in an organization that had influence in schools, I couldn't believe it. You know, I had to wake up to a lot of this in like 2018, 2019.
Wow.
You know,
when you
so
were detransitioning, it must have blown your head off.
it did. I mean,
Yeah.
because you know, when I was trans-identified, I'd heard of detransition. I'd heard of Walt Hare.
Oh yeah.
So like I knew that it was a thing, and I knew that transition regret was a possibility. But I never really thought about it because I couldn't fathom in my mind that I would ever do it, you know?
How did it come about? What made, where did the seed make you think I'm going to detransition?
So I'll say this bluntly. Prior to my double mastectomy, there was not a slither of doubt in my mind. You know, you could have sat down with me in early 2017 and really, really tried to get me to open up about everything. And I probably would have said, not listening, I'm a trans man, that's it. And then I don't know, there was something about when I was taking the not puberty blockers, when I was taking the testosterone, the changes were very slow. So you had a lot of time to adjust yourself, you know. So very gradually the beard came in, very gradually the Adam's apple developed, like the muscle mass, everything's very gradual. And so it's a very gentle, you just slide into the pool as these changes happen and you just accept them. With the double mastectomy, 1 minute I had breasts and the next minute I had bloody weeping gashes. And I think that smacked some sense into me, I think, because I remember waking up, the nurses were shaking me. I was in the bed and they were wheeling me back to my ward, and they were sort of shaking me and patting my face, and they were pointing down at my chest, and I'm like high as shit, you know. I'm like, ooh, and I so vividly remember looking down, and I had my bandages on, and there was blood seeping through them. You know, you would imagine that the bandages would be white because they'd be fresh, but no. And I looked down, this big bloody bandage, and then I passed out, went back to the ward, woke up again. I had my drainage tube stuck in me. The blood on my bandages by that point had went brown. I had absolutely no sensation on my chest. I was in quite a lot of pain despite the pain medication. And it was just, compare that to the gentle ease into the changes of testosterone. It was like, here's your double mastectomy. This can't be undone. Live with it. And I think that whatever gate in my mind had been locked, that was the lockpick. That was like, here you go. Think about this. I was like, wow, I have permanently and irreversibly changed my body in a way that can never be undone. So you better hope you don't regret it. And then I was like, but what if I could have gotten better without this? And it just spiraled from there.
Oh my
I often get that look when I tell that story.
God.
I'm at that stage where I like to sort of laugh and joke and be very sort of dark humorous about my experience now, because that's how I cope. Like, I'm not saying laugh at some poor younger detransitioner who's
I know.
breaking her heart.
I know.
But for me, like, I make a lot of really dark jokes about stuff like that. And people are like, oh my God, that's so insensitive. And it's like, but I can't
Anna.
undo this.
Yeah.
If I don't laugh, I will cry. And
Well,
I'd much rather laugh.
humor will get us through a lot. There's one last thing I just want to ask you, and I know you have to go soon. Is I think well, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I get the impression you're a linchpin and you are given an awful lot of support. And I'd love if there was other supports. I would love if they went over to things like Beyond Transition and Jen Speck or anything to give themselves support, that it's not all on. There's often a couple of detransitioners, and you're one of them, that seem to get the brunt of an awful lot of very distressed people. And I know you take it very well. It feels too much for me. I'm just looking at it and I just worry myself. I worry for you. I feel that's very hard, if I'm honest.
Like that, thank you. That really, really does mean a lot to me. Like, I probably should have said this earlier, but I have temporarily paused one-on-one private communications with detransitioners because I won't go into details or anything like that because we don't have time. But last month, something very distressing happened with another detrans woman, and it really, really took a toll on me. And I was like, I can't be sitting up at 3 in the morning when I'm up at 5 for work
No.
because I've got this. I can't, even if I was a therapist, I still wouldn't be in any position to be doing it. So I did, I've sort of put out a message in those private spaces where I'm like, look, there's other places you can go. I'm really sorry, but I
And
need to step back.
there
Yeah.
is other places they can go. Please, people are starting to go. Certainly, Genspect has got loads from the detransitioners looking for support, and I'm thrilled they are. It feels like the detransitioners have been relying on each other for so long; they're used to it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, grand, but honestly, that's too much. I just think it's too much for you, and it's too much for a few others who are taking it, and it frightens me. I do want to say therapists have boundaries, so they know how to handle the 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning. You know what I mean? While you
Mhm.
don't, why would you? And so you
Yeah.
could end up absolutely strung out.
Yeah, because do you know what, that way where I was like, it's 3 in the morning. As far as they're concerned, I'm asleep, so I can just ignore it. But I can't just ignore it because what if they hurt themselves? Like it's yeah, I bit off far more than I could chew because when I first got into this, I thought there's like 5 other detransitioners out there. I had no idea how many of us there were. And as my platform has grown, another message, another message, another message. And
Yeah.
before I knew it, I'm like, I can't. It's this is too much for anyone, let alone me, when I've got my own shit going on. So
It's too
I
much for anyone. And you have your own processing, it'll trigger you and things like that. How many do you think are out there, even in the UK, or have you any?
it's so hard to say. I mean, I will say that the vast majority of them do seem to be from America and Canada. You might have assumed that I would have said from the UK because I'm in the UK, but no, most of them are from overseas. And I would say when I came back from my break last year up until today, so we're talking, oh, actually about 10 months. I've probably since then been in contact personally one-on-one with 30 something detransitioners, new ones, not ones that I'd spoken to prior to that break. Obviously 30 something doesn't sound like a massive number, but when you consider that as specifically the ones who have went online to look for help and chosen to contact me.
And that is 30 people in very high extreme distress, kind of.
Mhm.
I am in something. Even if they come across cool at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
there could be a huge cauldron of distress that you can find yourself in. Are you going to look after yourself?
I don't have to look after myself. He does.
Oh, I'm glad you do.
Like, that's, I did say to him at one point, because my phone goes off at 4 a.m. and I go to try and sneakily pick it up and he's like, turn it off. I'm like, right, okay, sorry, back to bed. I mean, that's what you need. You need people in your life to remind you to take care of yourself. And I think that as long as, because you must feel like that all the time as a psychotherapist, you must obviously feel very, very protective of people, but you still need to be grounded and have people to say, Stella, stop trying to save them right now and go to sleep.
Yeah, and have a laugh. Let's watch a film.
Yeah, exactly.
Go and cuddle, for me, like go and cuddle my kids or cuddle my husband and have a bit of a laugh and just lightness. Because if you're in the heavy all the time, you lose yourself. You lose everything, don't you? Well, thank you. It's a great day, really. It's sad that we had to get here, but it's a great week, I think. What do you think?
I couldn't be happier with the information from Jids, and I cannot wait in the coming months to hear similar about Stonewall and Mermaids.
And Sandyford and Crumlin and Dublin.
We'll get Sandyford up here eventually. There's motions behind the scenes up here, I'll say that.
Very good. Very good. Thanks, Sinead.
Thanks, Stella.
Thanks a million.